Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host. And you know, Earth Day is coming up and we have Joe Gantz, an old friend of mine actually, who is a filmmaker. His new film, Race to Save the World, is releasing on Earth Day, April 22nd. You can see it at select theaters around the United States and with nonprofits. So there's a $10 ticket and they split the revenue with the theater or the nonprofits. So it's a way for you to support local efforts for independent cinema. And after Earth Day, it's going to be available on Amazon, Google Play, Spectrum On Demand, Vudu, and other streaming platforms. It's an inspiring and challenging film about people who have decided to put themselves on the line, passionate activists between ages, say, 15 and 72, who are fighting for a livable future. And these climate warriors have put their lives on the line to push for change, regardless of the personal cost. And for that reason, it is a really challenging film to watch because you could really fall into a sense of despair, but what they hold on to and what they continue to work for, our planet, is an incredible inspiration. Joe, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Good to see you again.
It is. And so we have worked together on some storytelling efforts in the past, and it's great that you are telling this story. It's also an interesting departure for some of the things that we've done in the past. Now, you originally came to prominence for Taxi Cab Confessions, a film, or actually a series that was really interesting to watch back in the 90s. How has the Race to Save the World changed your perspective? Sitting down and talking with these people about their essentially desperate struggle to save their world. What do you feel after having completed the film?
Well, so before starting this film, I had noticed that climate change documentaries were kind of overwhelming to approach. Mm-hmm. In the early days, people learned about climate change from documentaries, but after a while, that information was sort of in the ether, and people knew sort of how bad things were and how much worse they were going to get. And these documentaries would come out and be very well done, very beautifully produced, but you had to really steel yourself to watch them because you knew that the information was going to be so depressing. I felt that my style of documentary, which is life in progress, what I call life in progress, where you choose your subjects and then you fade into the background and you let their lives sort of, them go about their lives organically and then weave that into a narrative in the editing, was suited to a type of documentary that would be certainly more inspiring, because these are people that are in the trenches doing anything they can. And many of them say that the antidote for depression is to take action. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're doing. The difference between these people and most people is that whereas most people are trying to kind of tune this out and go about their lives so they can kind of, not be depressed, perhaps, mm-hmm. Not be overwhelmed, these folks cannot tune it out. And they're just putting themselves on the line. And sometimes that's hard for their relationship. Yep. It's hard for their career. I show all of that.
And that's what's really striking is in the case of one of the people in the movie, Michael Foster, who is an activist from Seattle who shut down the Keystone Pipeline. He cut open the fence and turned the crank to turn off the oil flowing from the tar sands in Canada.
In North Dakota.
North Dakota, excuse me. And he ultimately went to prison, a process that you elucidate in detail as he went through his trial and so forth, as well as his release after a year. He got a light sentence, but it really took a toll both on him and his family. And he had previously, as he explained, lost his family over his focus on climate. His previous wife and children he'd lost that family. There's a lot of personal cost in your film. Tell us about Abby Brockway, who opens the film blocking an oil train to Anacortes, Washington?
Well, Abby's interesting. She's also from Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
She has a husband, and her daughter was about maybe 13 when the film started. And she really barely talked about it with her family ahead of time, ostensibly because she didn't want them to worry or to have the police know about it. But I think she could have told a lot more to her husband. He would have been happy to have known more in advance. And so she went with 4 others, the Delta 5, they called themselves, and they put a tripod, I think it's about a 20-foot tripod, on the railroad tracks. And she sat on top of the tripod, and the other 4 chained themselves to the bottom of the tripod, and they refused to leave. And they blocked this oil train to make the point that these oil trains are extremely dangerous. They can blow up. One blew up. There was a very huge accident where a train blew up.
In Bellingham, Washington.
Bellingham, yes. And 2 kids were killed. But another train derailed a mile from Abby's daughter's school. And so they blocked this train to draw attention to it. They went to trial. The trial was very interesting, and we filmed all of it. And, she felt that it's important to, stop these oil trains and to also show that they're cutting costs and cutting conductors, and it's getting more and more dangerous as time goes on.
It was really striking to listen to her describe what she was doing. She just said, this is just a tiny drop in the bucket, but when these drops fill up the bucket, that will be a good thing. And yet, all through the interaction, both with her family and with the court, she struggled with this sense of fighting the arbitrary sort of rubber stamp actions that ignored all the risks that she was trying to call out. And is that sense of powerlessness the primary catalyst that you found driving people to take these direct actions, such as turning off the Keystone Pipeline? Or were they also trying to accomplish a larger political goal of getting people to think more broadly about these issues? It often was not clear to me whether they had addressed their own personal anxiety as much as they had tried to change the public dialogue.
Well, that's a good point about a sense of powerlessness, because it's pointed out in the film that FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and this is the commission that rubber stamps, that okays every single fracking well, every single oil well, every single nuclear power plant in the country. It's not run by the federal government. It is a agency run by, I guess, the oil companies that nominate the people and run the organization. So there certainly is a sense of powerlessness between that fact and the fact that many people in government are given these donations by the oil company and are beholden to them. There's a sense that even if everybody in the country, or certainly the majority of people in the country, wanted to do something about this, and Abby talks about how the majority of people in the community certainly want to do something about it, it never seems to get done. So that probably is a factor in it. But I think they also want to change policy to any extent they can.
Well, and so there was a younger guy, Aji Piper, who was one of the Earth Guardians who sued the state of Washington, demanding that they apply clean air laws. And he talked a lot. He had the most positive statements about where he would like to go, the transition to electrification, positive changes in terms of justice and equity in society. And at the same time, he struggled with, throughout the film, depression driven by climate anxiety. And it was striking to hear I believe it was 17 at the time, a person say, I'm going to take one last stab at this, as though there really was not much opportunity for change left. What did you see? It tells a little about Aji and his brother Adonis. They have a very interesting role in this film as reflections of the youth movement that is going to take this charge up, and I think lead us to a real change. But it's really it's almost painful to watch how much they're suffering. You really captured something there.
Well, you might want to interview them directly about this, but my take on it is that they put together a group of young teenagers and even kids younger than that to be on this court case. And in the course of being on this court case, these kids learned a tremendous amount about how dire the situation is with climate change and what it's going to mean to their collective futures. I mean, they're on the court case. The court case talks about that at length, what's at stake if nothing is done or if little is done. And then there is this whiplash effect where they won a case from Washington State, which said that Washington State had to look after the future and change the way they dealt with carbon in the atmosphere, climate change. And so all these kids were extremely hopeful and feel like, my gosh, we did this, we accomplished this. Right. And then it turned around, and in some kind of future court cases, they did nothing. They undermined it to the point that it was meaningless.
Well, as a Washingtonian, listening to the Washington lawyer complain that these kids were being unreasonable because they wanted a 96% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2050 it was really striking, because that is basically our national policy. And it is the national policy of a lot of other countries, but we're not acting on it. And
you have a governor that is supposedly one of the leaders in the country in wanting to fight climate change.
Well, and again, so I was consistently running up against this sort of wall of absurdity that you capture so effectively. How did your subjects find a sense of efficacy and hope in all of this?
Well, I would say over and over, different people in the film say the only way to fight depression is to take action. That if you're in there doing what you can do, Miriam talks about being on this march across the country. She walked across the country at age 72 with a group of people called the Great Climate March from Long Beach to Washington, D.C. And she says, taking one step at a time, doing what I can to talk to people, take action. That's my antidote for depression. And many other people say similar things. I think one of the great quotes is Bill talking to his daughter. And his daughter says, I think she is maybe 16 at the time. She says, I'm not afraid of change. I think change is inevitable, and change is good. And then she looks over at her father, and Bill is really articulate and has a great sense of humor. And he says to her, and they both smile, realizing what she's just said, that change is good, like some blanket statement.
Yeah.
And he says, well, change is inevitable. But are we going to be the authors of that change or the victims of that change? And I think that is a really powerful statement when you sit back and think about it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the great moments. And Bill, by the way, is a kayaktivist. So they've been
he started the kayaktivists.
And blocking, for instance, the deployment of the Shell oil rig that was being sent to the Arctic. Really powerful moments that you captured, people being pulled from the water by the police, fighting for this country. At the end of the climate march that you mentioned as well, you show people actually trying to blockade the entry to FERC, the agency we're just talking about, which isn't even an agency. But it's being protected by police who are enforcing the law. And what you capture, for instance, in North Dakota is, in the case of Michael Foster, the Keystone activist, he's being characterized as bad as Al-Qaeda by the state. On the other hand, this is just an ordinary person trying to take some action to raise awareness. And he said, he described how he came to act as, I'm just not willing to keep going on pulling the trigger on this planet. How did you see these folks acting on their concerns in other aspects of their life that maybe didn't show on camera? Were they also making radical cuts to their own carbon footprints or their understanding of their own carbon footprints?
So Michael is an absolutist. He has very little patience for anyone who is not doing what he feels is necessary. And so, he lives by a set of rules. He doesn't have a car. Mm-hmm. He won't take a plane anywhere. He'll take a train if he has to go to court or whatever.
Right.
And that's been hard for him in terms of his family. His wife certainly lost patience with that approach. And so, everyone's a little different. Miriam walked across the country, but she does have a car. She, I think, avoids taking planes, but she will drive to some place to visit friends and make sure that, she keeps those relationships going. So everybody's different. And it's also affects their family differently. Bill spent a tremendous amount of time away from the family during these protests, right, and missed certain moments in the family, his daughter's dance recitals, and he was there for her birthday, but it was like barely in time and whatnot. So, they have to juggle those things and the repercussions of that.
Now, you also have Mark Kirkskard, the author, talk about the popular movement and being key to stopping big oil. And he says, they vote. He describes Exxon's or some oil company's CEO wanting to call the president, and the president saying, well, I've got 100,000 people out in my front yard who are protesting you. That event, that kind of catalyst, public interest, is really critical to changing the dialogue. And Hertzgaard calls out the fact that Nixon, back in 1970, when the first Earth Day happened, and 1 million people came out in the United States, 20 million people globally, he ended up creating the Environmental Protection Agency, supporting the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and a number of other progressive, environmentally aware actions. Granted, they haven't all followed through to the degree we'd like, but they are responsible for a lot of the environmental protection we've got in place now. Did you see across all of the different activists that you covered the catalyst for a movement big enough to make a president, particularly a president who is pro-climate action, act now and take bold steps in order to reduce our CO2 emissions?
Well, I agree with Mark Hertzgaard that it is going to take a popular movement that's willing to make their voices heard, to get into the streets in order to convince the politicians that they, need to move forward and make the necessary steps to seriously fight climate change. I mean, it's even in the bill that the infrastructure bill that has all these alternative energy and pro-climate change aspects, they say it's too little to really make the kind of changes that are needed. I've read that it will take, $1 trillion a year for 10 years to make the kind of necessary changes to bring down the temperature in the long run. And, are we willing as a nation to do that? Well, our politicians certainly aren't willing. So the only way to make that possible is for people to demand it. And, 100,000 people demanding it is not going to do it. It is going to take some kind of mass public stance, like during the Nixon administration when 20 million people got into the streets. So if this film can inspire some people to take action, and people don't have to take action, in the ways that some of these people did, like, turning the valve on the Keystone Pipeline or blocking a train or even walking across the country. They can simply go to protests and write to congressmen and do things like that. But I think everybody has to realize that they're needed, and that until there's a certain momentum, that things are not going to get done to the level that we need them to make these kind of positive changes.
So one of the things I was struck by is that the activists in the film are generally interested in uh, stopping a lot of what we currently do. But you made a previous film that focused called Ending Disease, which explored a variety of really stirring medical advances, which are, of course, technologically driven. And these activists were widely critical of the notion that technology could help us get out of this. How did this film affect you differently than Ending Disease? Did you kind of question the expressed faith that you showed in Ending Disease and technology to help solve problems after having spent the time with all of these activists?
Well, I made these two films concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
And Ending Disease followed stem cell research and regenerative medicine is
Right.
fundamentally changing medicine from treating diseases over a lifetime to creating one-time cures. We followed 10 different clinical trials for brain cancer, breast cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, HIV, traumatic spinal cord injury, retinitis pigmentosa, and SCID, which is babies born without an immune system. And we found out that, these are still in clinical trial, but these cures or potential cures are moving forward at an amazing rate. And some of them are already succeeding. Other ones are making tremendous progress. And so medicine is going to fundamentally change over the next 5 to 10 years in ways that people, I don't think, realize. But I think the point of the people in Race to Save the World is that if you are sitting at home waiting for some kind of technological driven cure to the environment, be that geoengineering or some kind of amazing advancement in alternative energy, that is not going to do it. And what that might do is just encourage people to keep living the way we're living, which is, creating more and more CO2. And what we need to do is to be honest with ourselves, wrap our mind around this, see how critical it is that we act now and don't put it off. And, many politicians claim that you can put this off because we're going to be rescued by some of these technological changes. And I think that is a mistake to wait. We have no time to wait. We have to take action now. There are things in place now that if it's done on a global scale, or if the U.S. government totally gets behind it, we can achieve amazing amounts in a relatively quick period if we all get on board.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is the U.S. and in Europe in particular, as the forefront of the wealthy nations, can make the biggest difference because we are also the largest producers of CO2 emissions. So the question I want to follow up on what we were just talking about with is direct action like you portray the only route to change? A lot of these folks said, I'd like to do more than march. Did they share ideas with you about things that they would like to do to change policy or to try to influence corporations to do the right thing beyond direct action?
Well, I think that the reason a lot of these folks went to direct action is because, as you said earlier, they felt powerless and that nothing was changing. And you have a system where, as I said, even if, 2/3 of the country or more agree that climate change is this huge problem that is going to affect all of our futures, that it's only 20% of the Congress and Senate that seem to understand that or get behind it. So they feel that what they have to do is to draw attention to this. So these people are willing to do extreme things to draw attention to it. But if the question is, do we all have to do that? Absolutely not. What we have to do is get involved. We have to make our voices heard. We have to show politicians that there's a huge wave of understanding that this has to be addressed, that climate change has to be addressed now, and that, millions of people are willing to get into the street, make their voices heard, take a stand, and demand that the government takes action.
So as you think about what stories need to be told about climate change and climate awareness, what are the next things that we need to look at?
Well, the thing is with storytelling, it's how you tell the story more than say exactly how huge the story is. And I learned that on Taxi Cab Confessions. There was a ride that didn't get into the Taxi Cab Confessions where we picked up a woman at the hospital, and her boyfriend had just been stabbed. And she talked about it. She had a pillbox hat. She was very stiff in the cab, but she was a young woman.
You've told me about this. You've told me about this in the past.
Yeah, and so she told this story, but she told it without emotion. And then there was another story in Taxi Cab Confessions that did get into the show that was very compelling, where you had 4 homeless kids that were piled into the back of the cab, and someone had stole their puppies. They had a litter of puppies, and somehow someone had stolen them. And they were so angry and so upset, and they were looking for the people who stole their puppies. So the thing about storytelling is to get the whole story in a way that you're drawn in. So you can tell a story about someone who is doing something relatively every day, and if you capture that story in a way that shows how that person thinks and their relationships and how they go about their life, and it can be very compelling. On the other hand, you can have someone turning off the Keystone Pipeline, and if you don't get into the backstory and you don't understand why and how they do that and what it means to them, it can be not that moving. So I think storytelling is really important, and there's millions of stories out there. These are not the biggest stories. There's stories like this happening in every country and probably in every city. So there's a lot of stories to be told, and I think that will make people understand that everyone can do this. Everyone can do something. I think when you see Miriam at 72 or Aji at 15, you say to yourself, well, if they did what they did, then I can do something, and that's the goal.
And that's what comes through at the end of the film. You do a sequence of various people taking action, and there's joy in that action. The fact that they're acting really comes through. And to me, that was the counterpoint to all of the challenges I had with the emotional confrontations everybody was having. Because watching particularly Abby and her husband, when he says, you want to go to jail? And she says, well, if I have to. And he said, I'd like to have known this before you started. Those are I was really torn watching that. But you finished on this people acting, and it was really inspiring. It turned the story for me in a way that was really compelling.
Well, the film was well edited by my son, David, and the music was done by my son, Nathan. So it's a kind of a family affair here. And thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, I think it's not easy to weave together these 7 different subjects and 5 different stories into a compelling narrative, and to create this energy that the film has and the sense of optimism.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you for taking time talking to us today.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great seeing you again, and thanks for having me.
Well, folks, that was Joe Gantz. He's the director of The Race to Save the World. It's going to release on Earth Day in select theaters and at various nonprofit organizations around the U.S. You can check that out at www.theracetosavetheworld, all one long word, .com, www.theracetosavetheworld.com. And after Earth Day, you will be able to stream this on Amazon, Google.
6 weeks after, though.
6 weeks after. 6 weeks after. So you get out there and see it in the theater, but then if you can't see it locally, it will be available online. We're going to be back with another Earth 911 interview soon. In the meantime, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I want you to think about yourselves, think about one another, and let's all think about the world and take action on its behalf. We'll be back soon. Take care.